Okay, so I believe we should start in order to make it for the lunch. Okay, so this is going to be a lightweight presentation in comparison to the previous one. The role of communications in smart grid. A general overview, what is a smart grid and where the communications should fit in this, let's say, smart grid framework. The outline is the following, so we'll briefly just see how the power grid operates today. What is the smart grid and what are the improvements with respect to the current state that should take place in order to reach the smart grid paradigm. And some, let's say, introductory topics into how the smart grid communication network should be organized in an architectural way. And some details, not very many of them, about communication technologies that could be used for the smart grids. Okay, so as most of you know already, that the power grid is composed of, let's say, primarily these elements. So we have, on one side, we have power generators, and on the other side, we have consumers. And then, in between, we have some kind of transmission and distribution network that connects these two ends of the power grid. So basically, we have transmission lines, which are organized in transmission and distribution subsystems that have different characteristics. And then they are also connected using transformers and relays. The power grid is assumed to be the most complicated system ever built by human beings. So basically it's a very complex structure, hectic, involved, built bottom up. So basically starting from consumers to the loads within the power grid of today. Here are some more details. The picture is taken from Wikipedia. Basically, we have on the one hand consumers, and on the other hand generation plants. Most of the power today is generated by bulk generation systems, so which deliver huge amounts of power. And then we have transmission lines and transmission and distribution subsystems connecting generators with the consumers. The generators typically generate power at voltages which are around 1000 volts or kilovolt, and then these voltages are stepped up to much higher values. We all know that the higher the voltage, the lower is the fraction of loss of the power. So we have a transmission grid which uses sometimes extra high voltages and high voltages. And then these voltages are stepped down to this distribution grid which distributes power to the consumers. Here we have a medium and low voltages. As I said, the transmission subsystem uses high voltages, and it is usually interconnected or a mesh network, whereas the distribution subsystem and the distribution grid is mostly radial, so it has a, let's say, a bit simpler structure in terms of topology, and it uses medium and low voltages to deliver the electricity to the consumers. The points of interconnection between the lines within the subsystems and between the subsystems are substations. Not necessarily, but typically there are some transformers which transform, so step up or down the voltage. And also, another important thing from the communication perspective is, in this point, are typically placed the measurement points of the SCADA system. So here is where the communications are basically placed in today's power grid. And these points are, so these SCADA points are typically in the transmission subsystem, not in the distribution subsystem. Of course, that was, let's say, a perspective of power grid from the, let's say, national level, but this coupling of all the elements is not taking just part on the national level, but also on the international level. So basically in Europe today we have several interconnected national power grids creating some regional groups. So there are basically 5 groups in Europe. The biggest one is the continental Europe, and we have some, let's say, insular, so the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scandinavian group, and the Baltic group, which is connected to the rest of the grid in Europe through, let's say, the former Soviet Union republics. This is just to give you the picture that basically the power grid is interconnected all over. So the disturbances in one part of the grid, one national part of the grid, can actually influence the whole power system in Europe, which happened and will happen probably in the future. What are the operating principles of power grid? So basically there are, let's say, 4 major issues. The first one is to balance supply and demand. There is no effective way to store huge amounts of electric of power. So basically, the supply and demand have to be matched all the time. It has to be continuous, of course, and non-disruptive. So this is something which we all expect from power grid. A related issue is that once we match the supply and demand, so we are distributing power, transmitting and distributing power to the system. The utilities would like to know how this power is actually flowing through the system. So building the picture, the image of the way that the power is flowing through the system is also very important, because of this way that the utilities know is the system working in the desired state of operation. Today, this is basically confined only to the transmission subsystem. So the distribution grid is, the state of the distribution grid is not, let's say, known as well as the state of the transmission grid. In case that some unwanted events happen, then we have so-called faults, and of course the idea is to avoid faults if possible, and if they happen, then to counter-effect them as soon as possible, because, as I said, the system is tightly coupled, interconnected, and the fault at one point can easily spread to the other. Finally, another operating principle is planning. So not just, let's say, reacting or getting in real time. The utilities and the policymakers would also like to, let's say, foresee how the grid will behave in future, and this planning is can be of the order of days, so just matching and forecasting the demand in the next period, and then it can reach to some, say, years or decades. So forecasting where the consumers will be concentrated in the future, what will be the power demand and the generation, how to extend the capacities of the generation and things like that. From the communication point of perspective, so, and then talking about smart grid, basically these 3 issues are the most interesting. So the communications should penetrate the power grid and somehow allow for, let's say, improved balancing supply and demand, building the calculating the power flows, or building this system awareness, and let's say reacting on the faults that occur. So these are the issues that the communication, and not just the communications in the future smart grid, should be mostly applied to. Today, there is, let's say, the use of closed-loop solutions, so where the human intervention is avoided, is rare in practice. So basically, on top of the control chain are today engineers. So there are people in control rooms and utilities who decide and see how the grid is functioning and decide what measures should be taken. The use of communications is limited. As I said, it's basically just, let's say, a small number of measurement points within the network in today's SCADA systems. So as I said, today we have just a couple of, some small number of critical points identified in the grid, where the measurement of the, let's say, power signals is being done and used in the SCADA system. As I said, confined mostly to the generation and transmission subsystems. These networks are, in communication sense, they are termed as legacy networks. So they use, let's say, typically wireline or wired solutions like PDH or SDH, optical networks, optical transmission, very reliable, but also very expensive, and therefore just confined to use at some small number of points. The smart grid should, and we talk about it later also, should, let's say, penetrate also the communications, should penetrate also the distribution and consumers subsystem of the grid. And that's basically the brief overview of the power grid today. And we'll now continue to see what is the smart grid. And of course, I took, let's say, the common resource, Wikipedia, and just quoted what do they say about smart grid. So this is how the US Department of Energy sees smart grid, or defines the smart grid. So it's a grid that uses information and communications technology to gather and act on information in automated fashion. So basically the idea is to use communications, gather some information, and then react on that information in automated fashion. Somehow to have a closed loop control of the power grid. And this should apply basically all the, let's say, subsystems in order to have the efficiency, reliability, economics, and stability improved with respect to the traditional power grid. If you go into more details, so what are the drivers for the evolution to smart grid? Basically, as I already said, we have to balance all the time supply and demand, and the idea is here to shorten the demand forecasting cycle. So basically, to see how the demand in the grid is, let's say, behaving in real time, and also somehow maybe even to influence that behavior to some incentives like dynamic pricing and things like that. So to gather the real-time data from consumers and generators. We're talking about, let's say, intervals of the order of millimeters or less. Then the idea to improve the reliability of the grid by building the high resolution image of what's going on in the transmission and distribution system. So-called situation awareness. So to basically see what are the power flows, to calculate the power flows in the network and see or identify if there are some, let's say, problematic segments in the grid. So basically to prevent faults. If there are faults, then the idea is also to fastly react to these faults and primarily to identify where these faults are taking place. Today, the so-called protective relaying is automatic and typically not coupled with communications. So there are some microcontrollers that actually do protective relaying, but do not inform where this has happened, and then the engineers have to see or to identify the exact points of faults and then react in order to restore the normal mode of operation. Besides these three, let's say, traditional operating issues, there are some new drivers. Today we are seeing that the so-called renewable generators are being more and more used. So not just to have the traditional bulk generators, but also to exploit the so-called clean energy. For example, in Denmark, I think that these days Denmark has reached about 50% of the power is supplied from the wind generation. These types of generators are different in their behavior from the traditional bulk generation. They depend very much on external factors, and they pose different control issues. So basically, the smart grid is also facing new types of monitoring and control issues. Also, through let's say the regulation of the markets, policy incentives, and basically through the advance of the technology, there are some new operating paradigms that didn't exist in the traditional power grid, so-called electronic or e-cars. So the users that are using electric vehicles that could operate maybe as virtual power plants. So most of these cars are parked most of the time, so maybe they can be used as some kind of storages or generators of energy. And finally, some users can act not just as consumers, but also as producers, which is denoted as prosumers. So users can consume, but also supply energy to the just a few examples to illustrate the need for this for the smart grid, the need for the evolution to the smart grid. This is an example also taken from Wikipedia about blackout that hit the northeastern corner of the US and let's say the mid south of Canada. There was the fault happened as the overloaded transmission line, as it says here, hit unpruned foliage. So basically the vegetation was high and there was some kind of local fault. And then there was a software bug in the control room of the utility that actually managed that part of the grid. And then the fault basically was not detected and spread over a much larger area. finally affecting 55 million people. And if there was a wide area situation awareness system in place, maybe something like that could have been prevented, and the economic costs of this fault could be much lower. Another example is, let's say, a more local one. So there was an excess of the wind-generated power in Northern Europe, basically in Denmark. And maybe you see during this week that the wind here is really strong sometimes. So there was, let's say, excess of power which actually caused cascade failures to the Northern Europe. If there was some, let's say, if the algorithms for the control of distributed energy resources were implemented at that time, then probably something like this could have been avoided. Just as a sidetrack, the biggest blackout so far, which probably could be avoided if something like a wide area system awareness is used, was it happened in India 3 years ago. So there was an interplay of several factors that ultimately led to a situation in which 700 million people didn't have access to the electrical power. So obviously, as the system is, the power grids of today are, let's say, increasingly dependent on and also coupled or interconnected, we need communications and control algorithms that could counteract these events like this. So these are the drivers. What are the obstacles to evolution to smart grid? Well, there are some which are, let's say, related to the investments and some which are related to the human factors. First of all, the electrical utilities are very conservative. So here we have like a power engineering community on the one side, and on the other side there are communication engineers, and they do not, let's say, they don't understand each other very well. So they don't collaborate, or they didn't used to collaborate and solve the problems together. I hope that this training school and this training network will at least remove this obstacle. Also, the electric utilities are conservative because they are facing a lot of regulatory and political obstacles. So it's hard to justify investments such as communications if the effects of the investment are not very obvious, because the electric power is a commodity, and the price of it should be as low as possible, and that dictates also the pace and the extent of investments in the power. Related to this item is the cost of investments. The communication systems are not seen as a shared resource. Typically, as implemented in power grid today, the communication system is considered to be a vertical application dedicated system. So basically, you build the communication infrastructure just for a specific application, and that makes communication systems very costly. If we had a separate mobile network just for data, and separate mobile network just for conversation, and maybe a separate mobile network just for video, then of course all of these networks would be very expensive. So that's separately. On the other hand, if we have a common communication resource that could be reused for different applications, then of course the cost of the system could be much lower. And with the advance of technology today, basically we can, to a certain extent, reuse the same communication system for different applications with the desired level of quality of operation. Also, if we want to implement closed loop in the power grid, then we are facing stringent or very, let's say, hard requirements. So considering availability, reliability, delay, and all the stuff that matters if you want to infer something fast and to react in that also. And then when the power grid was developing, some, let's say, hundreds and 50s and 30 years ago, then the communication and computer system was just not up to the task. But today, as the, let's say, the price of computing power and also communication system has been dropped significantly, then we can also think of using this in the closed loop control for the smart grid. Okay, so here is the, let's say, the vision of this future smart grid, or the, let's say, the main goal that the smart grid should fulfill is that to have a bidirectional flow of electricity and data taking place in all grid segments. So basically, instead of having just one-way power flow from generation to consumers, the idea is that in the future we have a bidirectional flow, not just of power, but also of data taking place in all segments of the grid. So that's the ultimate goal or the vision of the smart grid. Here is the related figure taken from the NIST, so which is the National Institute of Standards Technology, a federal agency by the US. So this is how they envision the smart grid. So besides the, let's say, traditional subsystems, there are also some new subsystems which are created by advanced technology, policy making, the regulation of the market, and things like that. So basically we have a power flow in the smart grid, and we also have a lot of communications taking place in all segments of the grid. In order to reach this goal, there has to be some kind of multidisciplinary innovation, which makes this problem interesting. So basically, in order to achieve smart grid, to reach the goal of the smart grid in the future, we have somehow how to have interplay between power engineering, communication, signal processing, and control. We have to have multidisciplinary research and innovation, where the fields, where the advances in one field would drive research in other fields and vice versa. From the communication point of perspective, and taking into account the closed loop control of the smart grid, basically we need communications to transmit or to, let's say, to carry the measurements of power signals to some control algorithm with the possible use of signal processing in order to extract the useful data from the observed signals, and then on the other side we need control, we need communications to relay the control signals to the grid. So basically, without communications, there is no closed loop control, there is no smart grid. What are the objectives of smart grid? So they are divided into national, consumer and utility objectives. More or less you have heard of all these issues or these objectives before. So we have to have a steady availability of power, more affordable power, monitoring and prevention of failures, reduced investments in the future, and also some kind of, let's say, environmental objectives, so the protection of the environment and reduce dependence on fossil fuels. From the consumer objective, we want to have a, let's say, steady availability of power that is of required quality. We want to have as possible, as low as possible the cost of power, and in relation to that, also to behave based on the information with respect to the power cost. And of course, if you're able to generate the excess of the power, then to supply this power back to the grid. The objectives of the utility, they are similar to the national ones. Improve stability, peak demand reduction, efficient control, improve situation awareness, diagnostics, reliability, and survivability of the power. And we'll see some smart grid applications soon that actually deal with these objectives in more details. Okay. So now I'm going to speak about some general information about how the communication network of the smart grid should be organized. So what is its architecture? Most of the information in this part are taken from, there is a book by IEEE, so how they see that the smart grid will evolve up to 2030. And over there they say that this, the smart grid or the communication network within the smart grid should be, or will be organized into three segments, into so-called wide area networks, field and neighborhood area networks, and home area networks. This comes as no surprise because most of the networks, communication networks of today, are organized in this way. The telephone network, the cellular network, the data network, the internet, basically, they all have these three, let's say, these three parts, which have different area coverages. But this is not the most, this is not the only distinction between them. They also serve for different purposes, so different smart grid applications will take place in these segments. They have different requirements, and they will require different technologies. So, wide area networks, as the name says, they cover large areas. They are mostly built by using expensive links and expensive equipment, so they are not, it's a large-scale investment to build a wide area network. They are typically wired. Sometimes you can use point-to-point wireless links, but typically you use reliable optical fiber to install wide area network. They're also very stable, so in terms of topology, so because the investments are large, then you are not expected to change the wide area network or the topology of the wide area network very frequently. Requirements that the wide area network have to fulfill, so they have to achieve low communication ranges, they have to achieve low latency, in more general terms, quality of service, have to be secure, fault tolerant, and they have to be based on international standards. When we say media layer here, it refers to physical media. Then, on more local scale, we have neighborhood area networks and field area networks. Basically, they are more or less similar. The main distinction is that the field area network is utility owned, whereas the neighborhood area network is, let's say, a more public network. So they should cover a local area. They have centralized topology. Typically there is one or more access points, so one or more clusters, and then the users in this network are communicating to the common access point. Typically wireless, doesn't have to be, but it's rather easy to implement wireless networks with respect to the wired ones, because of course you don't have to lay the transmission paths. Requirements: medium communication ranges, again low latency, some quality of service, secure, support of group communications. So as we are talking about centralized cluster topologies, then we have to have some kind of group communication support. And again, based on international standard. As I say, this is how IEEE sees the evolution to smart grid communication networking. Today, there are also some other, let's say, competitors on the market that use standards which are not international, which are not open. There are standards like LoRa or Sigfox or some other, where basically you have organizations of producers of telecommunication equipment that want to fill this niche, this segment of the smart grid communications. Finally, on the smaller scale, there are home area networks. So devices within a home can be organized in some network that facilitates smart grid functionalities, typically wireless, but you can also use PLC. Requirements: there should be short range. Also very important, they should be inexpensive. So no one's going to invest big enough money in home areas. Secure, they have to support some quality of service, but then again, if you're talking about some inexpensive equipment, it's, let's say that the level of quality of service that could be achieved in home area networks is much lower than you can expect from neighborhood area networks or field area networks, and of course much lower than the level of quality of service in the wide area networks. So as I said at the beginning, basically the main subsystems where the penetration of communications should happen in order to reach the smart grid paradigm is in the distribution subsystem and also on the consumer premises. So we should implement basically wide area networks in the distribution grid in order to achieve let's say the wide area coverage of the distribution grid that will facilitate smart grid applications like wide area situational awareness and so on. In certain segments of the distribution grid, basically in the last mile, there should be neighborhood area networks, and there are some significant installations already deployed with respect to smart metering or advanced metering infrastructure. Also, maybe some specific sites of the distribution grid can be covered by field area networks. Finally, in home, there should be home area networks. Of course, all these segments, they are not let's say, separate entities. They should be interconnected. So we have one big network that covers all the communications, segments of the communication network in this map. As I said, in the transmission and generation subsystem, we already have some kind of networks in place, so-called legacy communication infrastructure, fiber and cable, maybe DSL, PDH and SDH networking. And of course, this should be connected to the other segments of the communication network. Okay, so this was about the general architecture, and now I'll cover the applications, target applications that take place in different segments of the communication networks. We'll start by wide area networks. One application that I also referred to before, a very important one, is the wide area situational awareness, also known as a wide area measurement system. So the idea is to obtain accurate information of the overall grid performance, basically to see the power flows and the current state of the grid, and also to perform some control in order to achieve optimal performance of it. Today we have SCADA systems implemented. In future, we should have these SCADA systems should be supplemented by so-called phasor measurement units, or synchro phasors, or PMUs. So as the name suggests, we should the phasor measurement units should provide the measurements, real-time measurements, very frequent measurements of the phasors of the current and voltage. These measurements should be time-tagged in order to have the real-time picture of the grid performance. The number of PNUs, of course, depends on the distribution grid topology, but we are talking about hundreds of PNUs in certain distribution, let's say regional distribution segments. One of the talks today, the last one, presented by Jimmy Nielsen, our colleague, will actually be about this research, let's say, implementation issue. We have a project, SANSI project, which deals with the implementation of the wide area situational awareness in the distribution grid installation. The suggested topology of the communication network is such that these PMUs should somehow be clustered, so centralized topology, communicate to the phasor data concentrator, so some kind of access point, which then should collect, gather this information and relate to the backbone network, to the control. The bodies that deal with the standardization of the communications with respect to the wide area situational awareness are NASPI group, North American Synchron Phasors Initiative. So the architecture, centralized architecture that you saw on the previous slide was proposed by NASPI. IEEE also has a let's say, group which deals with the standardization of the communication. So they standardize the report or frame structures, how the data from PMUs is reported, what are the frequencies and what are the delays. And it's important to remember that the frequency, reporting frequencies should be comparable to the frequency of the power grid. So basically, we are talking about real-time image, and this image, the resolution of this image should be in the order of 60 Hz or even more. Also, another important point is the delay between the phasor measurement unit, so where the data is measured, and the phasor data concentrator, the access point, should be such that a report is delivered before the next report is available. So basically, here we are talking about real time. So we gather the data in real time, and we have really stringent deadlines to all these data is time tagged, and this image should be synchronous and let's say available continuously. So as I said, traffic type, so periodic, following the state of the grid very frequently. So the burden of the communication network is actually very high. The amount of data is, let's say, it's not small per report, but it's not very high. But the generation pace is high, and the delay constraints are small, so that we have basically a lot of stress on the communication infrastructure. Reliability has to be, as I said, very high. We made a study some months ago, submitted it to the Communications magazine. So basically, if you want to have a lot of PMUs in the distribution grid, and you want to use the cell infrastructure, then the burden on the cell network is very high. You cannot, let's say, the random access channel of the cell infrastructure, and the data, the demands for data are high, and the cell network cannot really, let's say, support the high PMU densities in a cell. Another application in YDR network is control of monitoring and control of distributed energy resources and storages. Typically, we are talking about renewable resources, but they can also be non-renewable. These DERs, they reside typically in microgrids. So we have a small, isolated, geographically close segments of grid that are connected on a common line bus, and also interconnected to the main grid. And in these microgrids, there are typically some renewable generators. There are two modes of operation of the microgrid: grid connected and islanded mode. In grid connected mode, the renewable generators within the microgrid should be controlled by the entity who is residing, logically at least, outside of the microgrid. In islanded mode, then when the microgrid is disconnected from the rest of the grid, then the generators should be controlled within the microgrid. This is just an example of the microgrid, what the microgrid is. So there is a main grid, so-called the point of common coupling, and there is a line bus to which the generators, like the wind generator or the photovoltaic generators, some loads, like electric cars, for example, or some other loads, and some storages are locally connected. One of the advances, or one of the let's say characteristics of the smart grid is that that the penetration of the microgrid or the organization of the power system should be such that there should be a lot of microgrids which are connected to the power grid. Basically, the power grid should be somehow devolved into microgrids, which should improve the stability and reliability of the power grid in total. Regarding standardization of the communications in microgrids, the most important standard is by IEEE. So there is a series of standards, I don't know how many, but 7, 8 of them at least, that are dealing with specifications and guidelines how to implement communications for the monitoring and control of the distributed energy resources. So, for example, they define the logical topology of the network, what are the messages, so what are the types and formats of the messages, how to switch connected to the island mode, and so on and so on. Another body that also deals with the standardization of communications in microgrids and distributed energy resources is this IEC, which have a standard that deals with substation automation. We'll speak about that soon. And they also have some extensions of these standards to incorporate monitoring and control of distributed energy resources. This is the logical topology of the microgrid communication network. So there are some logical entities. Controller, which is residing within the microgrid, but the grid-connected mode actually receives control information outside, from the outside, and then if the islanding occurs, then this controller takes over. This controller should gather data from energy sources, also points of the connection, loads, and their points of the connection, and maybe from some energy management system which controls the behavior of the loads. In case of monitoring and control of distributed energy resources, we have mostly periodic traffic and sometimes even driven. Typically, periodic traffic is related to the, let's say, continuous monitoring of the state, and event-driven traffic typically relates to the situation when there is some kind of usually unwanted event taking place in the network where you have to report with some kind of alarm. As you can see, the requirements of this type of application are less demanding than the ones related to wide area situation awareness. So we can even have some, let's say, high latencies in terms of tens of seconds, very low data rates, and lower demands for reliability, but still rather high. So this is actually not an easy task to implement in communication networks. In this sense, given the requirements, this could be considered as, let's say, typical machine-to-machine application in smart grid. Distribution grid automation, another application taking place in wide area networks. So the idea is to implement monitoring and control of the substations, and in order to detect faults when they happen and restore power as quickly as possible. So there are so-called intelligent electronic devices which do protect the relaying. So if there a fault occurs, they are used to, let's say, disconnect the point of fault from the rest of the grid. And the idea is to implement some communications over there and allow IEDs to communicate to the rest of the grid and some control centers. The standardization is done by IEC, so there is a standard series which I mentioned previously that deals with distribution information. Traffic characteristics. In this case, we are talking about event-driven traffic, so not periodic reporting, but we report something when something happens, so not periodically, and it's, as said here, mission critical. So it's very important that this traffic, this data is delivered. These are the requirements. Again, machine-to-machine, I would say, application, but which has a really high reliability and with event-driven traffic. The final application in, this was the final, the previous one was the final in wide area networks. Now we continue with field and neighborhood area networks. This is the application of distribution supervision. So previously we had distribution automation. Over there we had some kind of, let's say, monitoring and control. Here it's more about just monitoring. So the monitoring of passive infrastructure. So you cannot really control something in real time here. So the idea is to equip the distribution grid with some sensors, thermal, magnetic pressure, humidity, and video sensors, and which should periodically report some information to some monitoring centers in order to have increased visibility of distribution grid and possibly prevent faults. As you can see, for example, the idea is to have some kind of sensors which are clustered, and they report their measurements to some cluster head, and then this cluster head relays the information further on. The communication technology that could be used within the cluster is these are wireless technologies, and basically inexpensive technologies that are also not very reliable. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, some Zigbee or 6LoWPAN standards. So again, periodic, maybe event-driven traffic, a lot of devices, a lot of sensors, but as we are not having any control here, then the requirements are less demanding than in the case of the distribution information. In neighborhood area networks, the main and the most important application is advanced metering infrastructure. So the idea is to have two-way information transfer between the consumers and, let's say, the utility. This information could be tracking of consumption, billing, pricing, reporting some alarms, and outages. So some smart meters should access some access point, send some data about consumption and maybe the state of the grid, and receive some information back about pricing, and such. And there should be a lot of such smart meters in the area that communicate and receive information and send information to the common access point. Interesting fact is that if you just inform the users what is the price, then some research study shows that you can actually achieve 3 to 5% less consumption. So there is a lot of potential to gain by implementing advanced metering infrastructure. The standardization bodies that deal with advanced metering infrastructure, so we have ANSI, the American Standardization Institute, the IEC, there is an Open Smart Grid Protocol, wireless and bus. These are international standards. Then there are some standards which I mentioned already, which are not open, but made by union producers like LoRa and Sigfox. There is a lot of standardization going on and a lot of efforts because there is a huge market for this application. We're talking about periodic traffic here and sometimes even driven traffic. The thing is that we are facing here a massive number of devices, and the traffic is uplink intensive. So once again, a real machine-to-machine application. A lot of users trying to access the network and send some data, and they have a high random access load. The requirements, you can see here that we are talking again about small data rates, not so demanding latency requirements. Availability should be very high and high security. Another application in neighborhood area network is demand response. So advanced metering infrastructure was more about two-way exchange information. This one here is targets reduction of peak loads. So the idea is to somehow inform the users about the prices, and also make users subscribe to so-called load control programs, where the utility can actually control the consumer loads in order to somehow make the load profile, the aggregate load profile, more balanced over time. Because it is important that the grid operates as close as possible to the nominal point of operation, both globally and locally. So the idea is somehow to have a stable, not varying operation. The organization, there's an open ADR, automatic demand response standard, which deals with this application, and the idea is to share the existing infrastructure for the advanced metering information. The traffic characteristics, so again periodic and event-driven traffic, again massive number of devices, low data rates, let's say not very demanding latencies, high reliability and high security. Finally, the application of, let's say, controlling the charge of electric vehicles in the neighborhood area networks. So there are two important aspects of this application. First of all is to avoid peak charging load. So the idea is that not everybody charges the car at the same time. And also another interesting point is that, as I said, most of the cars are parked most of the time. So there is a potentially huge storage available, which could be used also for as some kind of virtual power plant for generation of power. Again, potentially sharing infrastructure of starting. In this case, so besides periodic and event-driven traffic, we're also talking about mobility. So the users can, of course, go from one place to the other and connect to the grid at the other point, and then we have some kind of, let's say, roaming issues in this application. Again, typical characteristics of the machine-to-machine traffic. And finally, about in-home area networks, there are a lot of possible applications. One is demand-side management or home energy management. So tracking of the consumption of the devices within in the house, and maybe according to the price, dynamically changing rotation schedules and regimes. And this home area network should somehow access the neighborhood area network through the smart meter infrastructure. Centralized topology, so one access point that communicates to the rest of the grid. Again, talking about predicting traffic, and let's say that since the inexpensive communication technologies will be used for the home area networking, then the requirements they can fulfill are not that. I don't expect it as high as the rest of the segments of the communication also. Okay, and we're reaching the last part of the presentation. Just a brief discussion of the potential communication technologies that could be used in the smart grid. So basically, there are two, let's say, major categories: wired and wireless technologies. From the perspective of wired technologies, we could use potentially optical fiber or power line communications. From the perspective of wireless, there is we use point-to-point wireless links, WiMAX, cell technologies, Wi-Fi, and let's say 802.15.4 technologies, which is actually ZigBee. Here is the table shows the suitability of different technologies for different segments of the communication networks in the smart grid. So optical fiber primarily will be used in the wide area, maybe in the field area networks and neighborhood area networks, but given the amount of investment that is required, the penetration probably, as is today in transmission, the subsystem can go into wide area networking in the distribution subsystem. Power line communications, they could be used in all segments. Point-to-point wireless links, typically just in the network backbone or the network core. WiMAX for wide area networking, but primarily IEEE sees it as a choice for the field area networking and neighborhood area networking. Cell technologies, given that they are basically omnipresent, they could be used in all segments of the grid. Wi-Fi typically is confined to home area networking, maybe some field area networks, in the microgrids. And finally, ZigBee and the data technologies will be used in the home area. Optical fiber, as I said, it's very expensive, but it also has superior characteristics. But given the amount of the investment required and let's say the extent of the distribution grid, it could be used basically just in the core or the backbone of the wide area network. Power line communications. The idea is a powerful one, so the idea is to use the existing power lines to transmit communication information and just to, let's say, upgrade the end points with the communication modems. So it can be used in all segments of the grid. The problem with these power line communications is that it suffers from a lot of discontinuities and sources of impairments that exist within the grid. So it's typically a narrowband communication that can achieve low to medium data rates. And as soon as you reach a transformer or some other discontinuity, then you can somehow have to avoid this point using some other communication technology. Generally, it can be said that high voltage lines have better characteristics than the medium and low voltage lines. Power line communications, as I said, could be used in the all speed segments and basically for the all smart grid applications. It is expected that they will play a significant role in the future, but they have to evolve, and the evolution should be or will be based on the advanced signal processing at the receiver of this network. So you have the communication medium and power line, you cannot really change that, but the idea is to use some kind of improved signal processing at the receiver transmission and the transmitting side in order to achieve high data rates, better reliability, and quality of service. Wireless technologies, there are some standards which are designed for general use, and today we will see how in some later presentations how the cell technologies and Wi-Fi can be used for smart grid applications. I'll speak briefly about WiMAX. And we will not cover today or this thing is called the standard that's specifically designed for smart grid applications and used in the home area. WiMAX is a standard created by IEEE. So 802.16 is the official name. It's at least when you read the documents by IEEE, it's the standard that they push as something that should be a good choice for the future field and area network. So it can achieve high data rates. It has a cellular-like network organization, so its organization really resembles the organization of the typical cellular networks. And they standardize physical and MAC medium access layers. Here is the network architecture. So the user is accessing the network through the base station, and then the base station to some dedicated lines, access gateways, and then this reaches the other networks, so the internet to some backbone. As I said, IEEE is betting heavily on WiMAX for standard use, and they specifically target the field area networking and basically neighborhood area networking parts of the future communication networks in this manner. And they also have a standardization activities with respect to these goals. So the idea is to use WiMAX to build a converged multi-service field area network, which will allow service for different smart grid applications like advanced infrastructure, data services to field workers, or security, video from some places, so some kind of substation automation and monitoring. It is used in some trials. The potential for commercial application depends if the price of the infrastructure and equipment goes down. So it's still expensive equipment to install WiMAX. Regarding the standard which deals with the neighborhood area networking, so they have adopted some methods to embrace the massive, let's say, the massive traffic in the access part of the network. So a lot of devices frequently reporting something to the grid. You will see in next presentations that, I mean, these issues are not just typical for WiMAX, but also for other access technologies. And these the ways to how to deal with the problems is basically valid for the other access technologies as well. So we have to address large number of devices. We have to handle extremely large number of connections. We are dealing with small burst transmissions, so we have small amounts of data that should be reported. The users are typically stable, so they are not changing their placement. And we have to have extremely low latency. Okay, I'll skip this one, it's not very important. Regarding the evolution of wireless technology for the smart grid applications, but also to be said in general, the problem that we are facing today is that there is not enough spectrum. So we have to use spectrally efficient technologies, but we also have to use some kind of dynamic spectrum access, probably to some kind of software-defined radio networking. Also, we have a massive number of users, so we have to have some kind of increased capacity, which could be achieved through small cells, pico femtocells, using relays. We can boost the performance of the protocols in the access network by using some cross-range protocol design. For example, Peter mentioned some examples in the last presentation about capture effect and similar stuff. Also, there are some promise of using some new technologies in higher bands, and to use short-range technologies which have limited interference ranges in low bands. Here's a rough comparison between the communication technologies that I mentioned so far. So optical fiber allows for highest data rates and highest ranges, but it's very expensive to implement. Power line communications, I say, narrow to low to medium data rates. Ranges are the orders of kilometers, and a lot of problems in the communication region. Cellular technologies, so from 2G to 4G, there is an increase of the spectral efficiency and also the achievable data rates. Ranges, typically the range of a cell is from 1 to 10 kilometers. Using licensed band, which means small interference, let's say, or controlled interference, easy installation. The price of the equipment depends on the standard that you use. So 2G is for the order of, let's say, a couple of euros. To 4G, we have tens of euros for a modem, but you also have to pay for the use. So that's another drawback. Binex, high data rates, ranges of up to 50 kilometers, licensed, can operate in licensed and unlicensed bands, but it's still expensive to. And there is a lot of competition that is actually taking place in this segment, where the Binex is positioned, as I said, LoRa and Sigfox for wireless and bus, of which you will hear on Thursday. And now we have the last two are the inexpensive technologies like Wi-Fi and ZigBee. Wi-Fi can achieve a high data rates, let's say ranges that are up to kilometer. Unlicensed band, implying a lot of interference. It's easy to install and it's cheap. And finally ZigBee, which is basically based on Wi-Fi standard, but with reduced potential. So small data rates, short ranges, perfect for home area networking. It's unlicensed band operation, easy installation, and cheap to use. And the final slide for today. Another comparison between access network technologies that gives some more details about certain issues related to the operation of the access network. So, as you can see, for example, if you compare power line communications, Binex and cellular, then, for example, the PLC suffers with respect to the security, standard-based reliability, large supplier system reliability, in respect to the other communication technologies. These WiMAX and cellular are, let's say, better suited on these aspects, so there it's also easier to find a provider and to install the networks and to use them if you're starting from scratch. Okay, if you want to find more information, then most of the things I presented today are taken from this book from the last year. And also there is another easy read, let's say, which gives a lot of details on the smart grid applications and the networking to achieve. And that will be it. So, if you have any questions,